Hi, welcome back to Module 5. We'll be spending this module talking about staffing as well as motivation. Like we've been doing in all of our modules, let's get some key definitions down. So let's think about staffing first. One concept is no matter how sophisticated the management system, employees make the organization work. Building good staff is like making homemade soup. The people you hire are the ingredients in the mix. High quality ingredients guarantee a first-rate meal. It's important to note that organizations do not function well without its people. We'll be talking about that next. As we think specifically about people, we need to recognize that an organization's most important resource is indeed its staff. They influence organizations' decisions and goals. They use knowledge and skills to create resources and wealth that ultimately help the organization, and they serve as agencies of society at large. So I want us to think about some examples of staffing, and we'll do this from a perspective of a sport team. So first of all, a coach may want to fill the various recruiting positions. And so how do they do that? They do this by recruiting players. They identify and recruit what they would deem to be the best athletes. They make attractive offers to those athletes in the form of a scholarship, we could say. And on the other side of that, in the same token that a coach wants to fill its slots, athletes also have preferences. And those come in the form of which team to join. We can think about this also from a management perspective. A manager of, say, a facility that offers physical activity in the community wants to recruit the best possible employees, and oftentimes they'll make an attractive offer to those employees to get them to join the organization or to take the job. On the same side, those individuals looking for jobs seek out the best job offer and or the best organization for them. Staffing is a two-way street. Let's talk about some specific goals of staffing. We're going to consider it in two forms. First, we have the person-task fit, or we'll call it the PT fit. We also have the person-organization fit, or the PO fit. That person-task fit is where employees has the right skills to perform the job effectively. The concern with a person-task fit is to ensure that a person in the job has those right skills to perform that job. Accordingly, the emphasis then is on hiring people with those right technical skills and providing additional training in those skills. In that person-organization fit, that concern shifts to whether or not the person shares the values, norms, goals, and objectives of the other organization. An additional concern with the person-organizational fit is whether or not the person to be hired fits in with the culture of the organization. If a manager is seeking to meet its staffing needs based upon a person-task fit, that manager will be focusing on content. In order to do this, the manager has to address a number of issues. First, that manager has to consider the staffing needs, and those should be considered for the immediate as well as the future needs. Then the manager has to think about specifically the job analysis. That is, what is the purpose of the job? And this job analysis gathers information about the job, the duties, responsibilities, also the working conditions and characteristics required to complete that job. Next, in order to get this out, that manager will complete or determine a job description. This is simply a written statement of what the person in that job does, how it's done, why it's done, and it typically involves job content, environment, and the condition of the employment. Finally, a manager seeking someone to fit into the person-task fit will do a job specification. This is based upon the information that they've prepared, and it's a statement of minimum qualification that a person must possess to perform a given job effectively. Again, I want us to think back just briefly up to the concept of this person-task fit. Recall that in doing this, a manager is seeking someone who has the right skills. By doing this assessment, job analysis, job description, and job specification, a manager can ensure that they find a correct staff member to meet this fit. In this slide, you'll find a breakdown of critical elements that can be considered in a job analysis. This is also found in Exhibit 9.1 in your text. I think it's super helpful as you begin to think about one of those areas and ways in which you can analyze your job. Spend some time looking over this and thinking about how this fits in detailed wise for that person task fit goal. As we are discussing staffing according to that person task fit that focuses on content, we have to discuss part-time employees. Part-time workers are key in the functioning of any organization, and there's a number of reasons to use them. Part-time employment has always been common in the service economy. It offers for flexibility and autonomy, and it reduces costs. There are a couple downsides, though, to using part-time employees. They may not be committed or as productive as full-time employees, and sometimes they're less satisfied with their work and career. Nonetheless, it's important to note that part-time employees do play a common role in the service industry, and they are also commonly seen under that person task fit goal category. We have finished up with the discussion of the person task fit, which focused on content. We're going to move on now to talk about the person organization fit. This focuses on job context. Although it's important that an employee has the necessary skills, abilities, and other personal and physical traits required to perform our task, as we saw in that person task fit, it's also important that there's a compatibility between the person and the organization. This is where person organization fit comes into play. It's also necessary to realize when values are in conflict, the employee is not likely to perform tasks well and may not perform them at all. So let me ask you this. Do you value excellence and winning in sports, or are you more concerned with being physically active and having fun? This question will just help determine what type of sport organization is a better fit for you. This is a great example of our person organization fit that focuses on context. Whether our organization is concerned with our person task fit or our person organization fit, we still need staff. So how do we go about that hiring process? First, we have to identify and attract people who can carry out the organization's jobs effectively. And how does the role of the manager come into play with this? They're responsible for recruiting, selecting, and hiring. We're going to talk about each of these pieces going forward. The first two steps in our hiring process, or our acquiring of staff, are recruiting and selecting. Recruiting is identifying and attracting a number of prospective employees from whom one selects and hires the best. Our typical methods of doing this: advertising, potential campus recruiting, employee referrals, and internal recruiting. In many ways, the internet has absolutely changed how we recruit employees. We have an ability to advertise our jobs nationwide. I do want us to make note, though, that still this notion of employee referrals and internal recruiting, or recruiting from within the organization, are still important in this recruiting process. Okay, so once we've begun to recruit employees, how do we go about selecting them? We screen applicants and select the best person who fits the job and the organization. In doing that, though, it is important that we follow government regulations as well as legal requirements. In addition, with that, we need to make sure that we avoid biases that get in the way of making a fair decision making. I want us to think about, I should say, some examples of unlawful questions that could be asked to job candidates. It's important to know that as an employee, we have a legal right, or we have legal responsibility rather, to those individuals we're hiring. It's important that we don't ask inappropriate questions about race, color, religion, sex, national origin, disability, age, or even ancestry. We as managers are responsible to know these things, as well as the legal ramifications of inappropriate hiring practices. Once we have determined and selected an employee that fits both our task and organization, we'll want to go through hiring. So this is simply offering the job to our candidate. It presents an employment agreement or contract. Oftentimes that contract consists of an offer letter. There are things such as salary and benefits, our job relationships, other benefits and commitment. It's the start date and as well as potential provisions for termination. Staffing in almost any organization is made up of both full-time and part-time employees. Sport organizations and even sporting events are a little different though. They also require the help of volunteers. Volunteers help events run smoothly, and they're typically even more important in getting sporting events off the ground. A couple types of volunteers I want to talk about. Some are set for policies and some help with service. There are different motivations for our volunteers, and at times there can be difficulties recruiting and maintaining our volunteers. In a couple slides, we're going to be talking about training as well as mentoring. This will help particularly with volunteers and keeping our volunteer force. Nonetheless, we need to recognize that within sporting organizations and particularly with getting sporting events off the ground, volunteers are key staff. Once we have recruited, selected, and hired our staff, there's also a process of training and development. Training is the thought that deals with new employees. It teaches new employees to do their specific skills and understand the organization. Development is a consideration of enhancing an employee's skills in order to do higher level jobs. Thinking about development is oftentimes devoted to the employees that are already in place. The goal of development is to enhance the human and conceptual skills of an employee. It is the responsibility of an organization to both train and develop employees. Unfortunately, there is no universal training manual, and this is even more so true for sport organizations. Staff in sport organizations are called upon to do a number of different skills and tasks. This slide, though, gives us some thought on ways that we can train our employees. And again, these may not be relevant to every sport organization or every staff in a sport organization, but there's some good places to start. These include such things as interpersonal skills, the ability to communicate with each other, technical skills, the ability to complete a task, business skills, mandatory skills, as well as performance management, and then those personal skills that an individual can build upon and improve upon. Think about development. So how do we go about training our staff? There's some traditional methods. Those can be done through on-the-job training or job rotation, as well as mentoring and coaching. In addition, with today's technology and resources, we can think about using technological resources to train our employees. They can be DVDs or web-based tools. We can also do video or teleconferencing. There can be podcasts, videos, and even webinars. These are all ways that we can train our employees to understand the rules and regulations as well as specific job skills in our organization. I also just mentioned mentoring. So what is mentoring? This is where we pair up an experienced person, and that person serves as the role model, gives guidance, and offers advice. This is a really interesting way for new employees to connect to current employees, as well as increase employees' skills and abilities. It builds self-esteem, confidence, and then even identity. There's benefits for both the mentor and the mentee. It should be noted, though, that mentoring is a timely process and it actually takes a lot of work. But in the outcome, mentoring oftentimes proves to be really beneficial. Now that we have some understanding of staffing, let's think about ways that managers might lead and motivate staff. So how can we define motivation? It's a process that starts with physiological or psychological deficiency or need that activates a behavior or drive that is aimed at a goal or incentive. A more simpler way to think about that is the process of arousing, directing, and maintaining behavior toward a goal. We'll be spending the remaining portion of this module, I should say, talking about managers motivating employees. Before we can talk about ways at which managers might motivate staff, let's first determine individual motivation. I have listed 5 things here for you. First, force refers to the needs, drives, and motives to be satisfied within the individual. The energy is the activation of the individual to pursue satisfaction, whereas direction implies the specific goals an individual is seeking. That intensity of behavior refers to the magnitude of determination to achieve the goal, and persistence of behavior refers to an individual's continued effort to achieve the goal. Again, recall that before we can think about ways that managers can motivate staff, we have to first understand how an individual might be motivated. There are a number of theories surrounding motivation, and we'll be using those theories to guide the remainder of our module, and we'll be applying those theories to principles of sport management. First, there are content theories. This is a need hierarchy theory. We also know it as Maslow's theory. And there are 2 factor theories. That's motivation hygiene theory. It's a Herzberg theory. There's also some process theories. That's Brooms expectancy theory, Adams inequity theory, and justice and fairness theories. Finally, there's our last theory we'll be considering. It's Porter's and Lawler's theory, and it's an integrative approach of somewhat of a content and process theories combined. Again, we'll be breaking down these theories as we move forward. Okay, we're first going to start with those need-based or content theories of motivation. They were the ones that we saw on the previous slide on that left-hand portion of the diagram. When a need is deprived, an individual is driven to seek resources and to take action to satisfy that need. Our 2 theories that we saw earlier is that need hierarchy theory, that's Maslow's theory, and then there's that 2-factor theory of motivation hygiene theory. We'll first talk about Maslow. Let's first start with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Those of you that have had an introductory level psychology course probably have seen this in the past. Maslow has determined this hierarchy of needs that an individual will seek to have met, and thus will be motivated to have those needs met. There's physiological needs, safety and security needs, love needs, esteem needs, and self-actualization. I think it's important to recognize when this applies to motivation that we must understand the needs of others and be critical in our attempts to motivate them and influence them by the understanding of their needs. So how can we think about and apply this to sport management? A recent sport management graduate would have these needs just like anyone else. The physiological needs potentially could be the salary or availability of housing. They have safety and security needs, specifically job security. They may have love and social needs. That is, they want to have types of coworkers and neighbors. There may be self-esteem needs, that they have a salary and promotional increase need. And finally, there may be those self-actualization needs of challenging tasks or those involved with creativity. Nonetheless, regardless, it is important to notice again that in order to motivate employees and staff, we have to recognize that in order to motivate individuals, we have to influence them as well as understand their needs. Like any theory, there are some limitations, as is the case to the need hierarchy theory. This theory cannot be adequately tested and it's difficult to measure. It's also based upon the needs of our U.S. middle class and it's not universal. Furthermore, thresholds for a particular set of needs vary from person to person. Therefore, it's difficult to nail down. So, what are the implications of the needs hierarchy theory for sport managers? First, it provides a basis for implementing reward systems and judging their effectiveness. It also allows managers to be in control of monetary and material resources they can manipulate to satisfy employees' needs, all except self-actualization. Okay, we're going to move on now to our second theory, the 2-factor theory. Our second content theory is the 2-factor theory. It could also be called our motivation hygiene theory. Motivators are considered those satisfiers, and they showed up more often in reference to satisfaction than to dissatisfaction. Our other component are those hygienes or dissatisfiers, and they showed up more often in incidents of dissatisfaction. The most important thing to take from this theory is that the motivators or growth factors were related to content of the work itself, and the hygiene factors were related to the context in which the work was carried out. That is, those things that motivated staff were content related, and they influenced how satisfied the staff was. Hygienes, on the other hand, are related to context, and they were the things that influenced how dissatisfied the staff or employee was. Here's a pictorial version of our motivation hygiene theory. This is also found in Exhibit 10.3 in your text. It indicates to us those hygiene factors. Remember, those are context-related factors, and they influence dissatisfaction. Those are such things as policy, administration, supervision, relationships, and so on. Those motivators are content-related, and again, they influence satisfaction. There's such things as achievement, recognition, work responsibility, and so on. This gives us a good image for us to think about ways that we can motivate our employees by influencing satisfaction or increasing those content-related things, and also then decreasing satisfaction by addressing those hygiene factors. So what are the limitations of our two-factor theory? Data does not completely support assumption that the two distinct sets of factors influence satisfaction and dissatisfaction. And furthermore, the methodology does not always hold up. So, what are the implications of this two-factor theory for sport managers? First, employees will be motivated only when the job offers responsibility, a sense of achievement, and opportunities for growth and advancement. Therefore, managers should progressively increase those employees' challenges and responsibilities to ultimately increase satisfaction. Ways that this can be done is through job enrichment, that is, redesigning jobs to satisfy those higher order needs. Some ways we can think about that are that we remove or reduce control and supervision, we grant additional authority to our staff, and maybe even increase the difficulty of those tasks. It also could be done by assigning whole units of work to an employee rather than having different employees work on different segments. These are just ways that we can think about increasing staff motivation with the consideration of the two-factor theory. Now that we've covered our content theories, let's move on to think about our process theories. We'll be addressing Brooms' expectancy theory, Adams' theory of inequity, some justice and fairness theories, and Porter and Lawler's model of motivation. Our first process theory is Brooms' expectancy theory. This is where individuals evaluate various courses of action and choose the one they believe will lead to expected outcomes. Four major variables to consider in Brooms' expectancy theory are valence, outcome, expectancy, and instrumentality. So what's valence? It's an individual's preference for particular outcomes. So for example, if a particular result is strongly preferred, then the valence for the result will approach the value of +1. On the other hand, if the individual strongly detests the outcome, the valence will approach -1. Okay, what are outcomes? Those are the results that refer to the consequences of a given act. What's expectancy? It's the probability estimate that effort will lead to the first level outcome or result, or the performance standards set by the organization. Instrumentality is the individual's estimate of the relationship between first level results and second level results. So how do these concepts interplay? Brooms' expectancy theory assumes that the force, so we'll call that motivation, with which an individual engages in an activity depends on the valence or the attraction of the outcomes, those rewards or incentives, the expectancy that the effort will result in a certain level of performance, and the instrumentality of performance in the attainment of those rewards. We can see this displayed here in our diagram. You can also find it exhibited in Exhibit 10.4 in our text. Our next process theory is Adams' theory of inequity. This theory discusses that individuals tend to compare their personal outcomes, or those benefits, and outputs or costs to those of comparable others. If the comparison is equal, we have equity. If the comparison is not equal, then we have inequity and tension. So, what are the implications for sport managers of this inequity theory? First, make sure that performance evaluations are fair and accurate. Also, make sure that distribution of awards and resources are also equitable. Avoid personal biases or preferences, and then also publicize all rules of rewards for distribution. Our next concept under process theories are justice and fairness theories. First are our distributive justice and procedural justice theories, as well as our interactional justice theories. Distributive justice theories are concerned with the fair distribution of available resources to individuals. Those procedural justice theories are concerned with how various ends or consequences are attained, and also deals with rules and procedures. Interactional justice is the manner in which outcomes are explained. Communication is sufficient, correct, and respectful. Two components of that are interpersonal justice and informational justice. Our next theory, which we've listed under our process theories, but it rather is somewhat of an integrative framework theory. This is Porter and Lawler's theory. It's an attempt to synthesize significant elements of our other theories, especially extends and elaborates on Brooms' expectancy theory, as well as synthesizing content in our process theories. I've included the visual here. You can also find it in Exhibit 10.6 in your text. It's important to note those pieces of our feedback loop and performance as standards. Spend some time investigating our diagram here, as well as reading through the notions in your text to help you better understand Porter and Lawler's model of motivation. Two key components of Porter and Lawler's model of motivation are these concepts of relationships and feedback loop. Let's go through these two pieces. First, let's discuss those relationships. Porter and Lawler first start off and talk about this effort-performance relationship. One of the significant contributions of this model is to highlight the complexity of this effort-performance relationship. We all know that effort does not always lead directly to great performance. For effective performance, it's necessary to have appropriate abilities and traits. So, from a managerial perspective, an employee can perform adequately in a job only if he or she has the abilities and traits necessary for the job. Okay, performance-reward relationships. If the individual has the necessary abilities and traits and perceives his or her role correctly, it's reasonable to expect that she will achieve an acceptable level of performance, so acceptable in terms of the organizational standards. Such a performance can result in rewards, both extrinsic, those rewards that are outside the individual, and those intrinsic rewards, or those rewards unique to the individual. Okay, reward satisfaction then. Receiving rewards should lead, in theory, to satisfaction. However, relationships between receiving rewards and deriving satisfaction from them depends on whether or not the individual perceives the rewards as equitable. You can see this roughly in box 8 on our previous model. Okay, let's talk about feedback loops. First, we have two feedback loops that we're showing. One leading from satisfaction back to value of reward, and the other leading from a relationship between performance and rewards to that perceived effort reward probability. So the first feedback loop reflects the fact that the receipt of rewards affects the value attached to those rewards. That second loop, or feedback loop, relates to the employee's perception of the probability that his or her efforts will result in the rewards sought. Okay, let's talk specifically about motivation in sport organizations. How can this information about motivation be applied to sport managers? We need to think about it that we design jobs in such a way that they are challenging and satisfying. In order to do this, it will help fulfill an employee's higher order needs. Furthermore, we need to think about that organizations differ in purpose and process, and they also have differing amounts of job enrichments. That can be based upon professional service organizations, customer service organizations, and those volunteers. We also need to think about it in terms of our staffing needs. Full-time employees, part-time employees, and those volunteer employees are motivated differently. We have arrived at the end of Module 5. We have spent this module talking about staffing, how to recruit, select, and hire. And we've gone through a number of theories as applied to that. We've also then talked about thoughts on motivating our staff. And in that notion, we also address theories as well. Here are some questions for review. Use these to check your knowledge on the topics.